If you are tired right now and you cannot figure out why, it might not be because you did not sleep enough last night. Right now, as you read these words, your brain is quietly burning through its energy reserves not because you are doing anything particularly demanding but because of everything around you. The objects on your desk, the notifications on your phone, the endless stream of choices you face from the moment you wake up until the moment you collapse into bed. All of it is silently draining your brain in ways you cannot see or feel until the exhaustion hits you like a wall. Here is the truth that researchers at UCLA and Princeton University have spent years proving through rigorous neuroscience studies. The less you have, the better your brain works. This is not about willpower. This is not about discipline. This is about the fact that when you reduce the unnecessary load on your environment, your focus sharpens, your sleep improves, your emotional regulation stabilizes, and your overall quality of life measurably increases. This is not philosophy. This is biology. And understanding it could be the single most practical thing you do for yourself this year. Now, before we go any further, let us clear up a common misunderstanding. When most people hear the word minimalism, they picture some extreme lifestyle where you throw away everything you own and live in a stark white room with nothing but a mattress on the floor and a single plant in the corner. That image has been popularized by social media, and it has scared a lot of people away from an idea that could genuinely transform their lives. The minimalism we are talking about here has nothing to do with deprivation or aesthetic extremism. It is a practical, science-backed strategy for reducing the unnecessary burden on your brain so that you can actually enjoy your life more fully. It is about removing what does not serve you so that what does serve you finally has room to breathe. Think of it less as a lifestyle trend and more as a cognitive optimization strategy, because that is exactly what the research supports. To understand why this matters so much, you need to know how your brain processes visual information and why your environment has such an outsized influence on your mental state. A neuroscience research team at Princeton University used functional magnetic resonance imaging, commonly known as fMRI, to observe how the brain responds differently in organized versus cluttered environments. They brought participants into the lab and had them perform tasks requiring focus and attention while surrounded by varying levels of visual disorder. The results were striking and unambiguous. When participants worked in cluttered, disorganized spaces, their visual cortex became overstimulated, and their ability to concentrate dropped by as much as 20%. The cognitive load on their brains increased significantly, meaning their brains had to work harder just to maintain baseline performance on simple tasks. But the most important finding was not about the people who noticed the clutter. It was about the people who claimed they had gotten used to it. Even among participants who reported feeling perfectly comfortable and adapted to their messy surroundings, the brain scans told a completely different story. A region called the anterior cingulate cortex, which is responsible for filtering out irrelevant stimuli and maintaining attentional focus, was working overtime in the background. It was constantly suppressing the flood of unnecessary visual information, burning through cognitive resources even though the person had no conscious awareness that anything was wrong. On the surface, they felt fine. Underneath, their brains were quietly exhausting themselves. This is one of the most insidious aspects of environmental clutter. You do not realize it is costing you anything because the cost is invisible. You just feel tired at the end of the day and you cannot explain why. You feel foggy and unfocused and you blame yourself for not trying hard enough. But in many cases, the problem is not you. The problem is your environment. A significant portion of the chronic, unexplained fatigue that millions of Americans experience every day can be traced back to this exact mechanism. Your brain is spending its limited energy budget on processing and suppressing stimuli that serve no useful purpose, and by the time you need that energy for something that actually matters, it is already gone. This makes even more sense when you consider how the human brain evolved. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in environments where every object in their visual field was potentially important. A rustling bush could mean a predator. An unfamiliar shape on the horizon could mean danger. The brain developed an automatic scanning system that evaluates every single thing in your environment and makes rapid unconscious judgments about whether it is a threat, whether it is relevant, whether it requires action. This system kept our ancestors alive in the wild, but it was never designed to handle a modern American home filled with hundreds or thousands of objects, each one triggering that same ancient evaluation process. When your bedroom is cluttered with clothes, books, gadgets, mail, random items you have been meaning to put away for weeks, your brain does not simply ignore all of that. It treats every single object as an open loop, an unresolved item that might need attention. Should I deal with this? Where does this go? Do I still need this? When am I going to take care of that? These microjudgments happen below the level of conscious awareness, but they consume real cognitive resources, and they never stop as long as the clutter remains in your visual field. When this process runs continuously in the background, your brain maintains a low-grade fight-or-flight state. Your cortisol levels stay chronically elevated, not dramatically like they would during an actual emergency, but just enough to create a persistent undercurrent of stress that affects everything. Chronically elevated cortisol impairs memory formation, makes emotional regulation harder, and causes you to become irritable and reactive to things that would not normally bother you. One research study found that people living in cluttered environments experienced a 40% increase in sleep problems and a 45% higher risk of chronic fatigue. Think about that for a moment. A single disorganized room in your house could be measurably degrading your sleep quality and your energy levels every single day. This is not a trivial matter of tidiness or personal preference. This is neurophysiology. This is a direct, measurable impact on your health, and it connects to virtually every other aspect of your well-being because sleep and stress regulation are foundational to everything else your body and mind do. This is precisely why changing your space is one of the most immediately impactful forms of self-improvement available to anyone. It sounds almost too simple to be true, but the evidence is overwhelming. Organizing your physical environment is faster, easier, and more immediately effective than almost any other personal development strategy you could try. Reading a self-help book might give you inspiration, but clearing off your desk gives your brain measurable, immediate relief. And here is what makes environmental design so much more powerful than willpower alone. Willpower is a depletable resource. Every act of self-control, every forced decision, every moment of resisting temptation draws from the same limited pool of cognitive energy. By the end of a hard day, your willpower is essentially gone, which is why you make your worst decisions in the evening. But your environment does not get tired. Once you set it up to support you, it works for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without ever needing to be recharged. If you want to change your life, do not start by trying to change yourself. Start by changing your space. That is not just practical advice. It is the strategy that neuroscience says is most likely to actually stick. People who have adopted a simpler approach to their living spaces report a remarkably consistent experience. At first, getting rid of things feels uncomfortable and even anxiety-inducing. There is a fear of regret, a worry that you will need something after you have let it go, a strange grief for objects you have not used in years but somehow feel attached to. But once the space is actually cleared, something shifts. People describe feeling like a fog has lifted. They say their home feels lighter, more inviting, more restful. They come home at the end of the day and instead of feeling the subtle weight of all the unfinished tasks their environment represents, they feel a sense of calm. This is not a placebo effect or wishful thinking. It is the direct physiological consequence of reducing the number of visual stimuli your brain has to process and suppress. When there is less for your brain to deal with, it relaxes. And when your brain relaxes, you feel it in your mood, your energy, your clarity of thought, and your ability to be present in your own life. But this principle extends far beyond physical objects. It applies with equal force to the choices you face every day. Psychologist Barry Schwartz introduced a concept called the paradox of choice, and the research behind it has fundamentally changed how we understand decision-making and satisfaction. In one of the most famous experiments in consumer psychology, researchers set up a tasting booth at a grocery store in California. On some days, they displayed 24 varieties of jam. On other days, they displayed only 6. The results were dramatic. When 24 options were available, only 3% of people who stopped to taste actually bought a jar. But when only 6 options were available, the purchase rate jumped to 30%, a tenfold increase. More choices did not lead to better outcomes. They led to paralysis, anxiety, and ultimately inaction. Everyone has had the experience of standing in front of a closet full of clothes and feeling like there is nothing to wear. That feeling is not caused by having too few options. It is caused by having too many. When your brain has to compare and evaluate dozens of possibilities, each one against all the others, the process becomes overwhelming and exhausting. And even after you finally make a choice, you do not feel satisfied because part of your brain is still wondering whether one of the other options would have been better. This is the hidden tax of abundance that nobody talks about. Neuroscientists and psychologists call this phenomenon decision fatigue, and its effects on daily life are far more pervasive than most people realize. Decision fatigue does not just make you feel tired. It systematically degrades the quality of every choice you make as your cognitive resources are depleted throughout the day. Research estimates that the average American makes approximately 35,000 decisions per day. Most of these are small and nearly automatic, like which foot to step with first or which direction to look when you walk through a door. But even these micro-decisions consume cognitive resources, and the bigger decisions, what to eat, what to prioritize at work, how to respond to a difficult email, how to handle a disagreement with your partner, all of these draw from the same limited pool. A landmark study examined the decision patterns of parole judges throughout their workdays. At the beginning of the day, when their cognitive resources were fresh, the judges approved parole in approximately 65% of cases. But as the day wore on and decision fatigue accumulated, approval rates plummeted. By late afternoon, judges were overwhelmingly defaulting to the easiest and safest option, which was to deny parole, regardless of the actual merits of the case. This was not because the judges became less compassionate or less fair as the day progressed. It was because their brains simply did not have the energy left to carefully evaluate complex information and make nuanced judgments. They defaulted to the path of least cognitive resistance. This is a biological limitation of the human brain, and it affects everyone. This is exactly why Steve Jobs wore the same black turtleneck and jeans every single day, and why Mark Zuckerberg adopted a similar approach with his wardrobe. They were not making fashion statements. They were eliminating trivial decisions to preserve cognitive energy for the decisions that actually mattered. You do not need to go that far, but the underlying principle is universally applicable. Simply cutting 5 minutes of wardrobe deliberation from your morning routine can meaningfully change the quality of mental energy you bring to the rest of your day. The most effective way to combat decision fatigue is not to develop stronger willpower. It is to design your environment and your routines so that fewer decisions need to be made in the first place. Schedule your most important and cognitively demanding decisions for the morning when your resources are fullest. Create routines and systems that handle recurring choices automatically. Decide what you will eat for breakfast the night before. Lay out your clothes before you go to bed. Assign fixed locations for the things you use every day so you never have to think about where they are. These small acts of predecision might seem insignificant individually, but collectively they free up an enormous amount of cognitive bandwidth that can be redirected toward things that genuinely matter to you. The feeling of being dragged along by your possessions rather than being in control of your own life is directly connected to this phenomenon. When you own too much, you spend a disproportionate amount of your mental energy managing, organizing, cleaning, maintaining, and worrying about your stuff. The more you have, the more your possessions demand of you, and at a certain point, you cross a threshold where your things are no longer serving you. You are serving them. This slow accumulation of obligation and cognitive overhead creates a creeping sense of helplessness and exhaustion that is hard to identify because it builds so gradually. In psychology, the concept of self-efficacy, which is your belief in your ability to control your own life and produce desired outcomes, plays a central role in regulating anxiety and stress. When your sense of control erodes because your environment feels overwhelming and unmanageable, anxiety increases. And when anxiety increases, people often respond with avoidance behaviors, one of the most common of which is more consumption. You feel stressed, so you buy something to feel better. The purchase gives you a brief dopamine hit that temporarily numbs the discomfort. But now you have one more thing to manage, one more object taking up space and cognitive bandwidth, and the cycle continues. For people with anxiety, simplifying the environment can have a remarkably direct and powerful stabilizing effect, because it physically removes the threat signals that the brain is constantly processing in the background. There is another dimension to this that deserves attention. The act of organizing and decluttering is itself psychologically beneficial, independent of the end result. When you feel overwhelmed and scattered, the simple act of cleaning a room or organizing a drawer creates an immediate sense of accomplishment that boosts self-efficacy. You prove to yourself that you can take action, that you can exert control over at least one part of your world, and that sense of agency cascades into other areas. A research team at the University of Minnesota conducted an experiment that demonstrated this principle beautifully. They placed participants in one of two environments, one that was clean and organized and one that was messy and disordered, and then offered them a choice between a healthy snack and an unhealthy one. The participants who had been sitting in the clean, orderly environment chose the healthy option at twice the rate of those in the messy environment. This was not coincidence. The orderly environment activated a sense of self-control and intentionality that carried over into an entirely unrelated decision. When your room is organized, you are more likely to eat better, exercise more, procrastinate less, and follow through on your goals. The environment sets a psychological tone that influences everything you do within it. Additional research has shown that people who work in organized environments report a 23% improvement in overall well-being and a 33% reduction in daily stress compared to those working in cluttered spaces. The saying that your environment shapes your behavior shapes your habits, and your habits shape your life is not just a motivational platitude. It is an empirically supported chain of causation. Understanding why this problem has become so much worse in recent decades requires looking at the broader structural forces at play. The rise of online shopping and next-day delivery has essentially eliminated the psychological friction that once naturally limited consumption. 20 years ago, buying something required getting in your car, driving to a store, physically selecting an item, waiting in line, and paying for it. Each of those steps created a small moment of pause where you might reconsider whether you actually needed the thing. Today, you can go from seeing an ad on social media to having the product on your doorstep in less than 24 hours, often with a single click. The entire architecture of modern e-commerce is designed to remove every possible barrier between the impulse to buy and the act of buying. And social media platforms make this exponentially worse by functioning as perpetual comparison engines. Their algorithms are specifically designed to keep you scrolling by triggering feelings of inadequacy and desire. Every curated image of someone else's perfect home, perfect wardrobe, perfect vacation activates your brain's comparison circuits and generates a sense of lack. You start to feel like everyone else has something you do not, like you need to acquire more to keep up, like your worth as a person is somehow connected to what you own and display. These feelings are not organic. They are manufactured by platforms whose entire business model depends on keeping you dissatisfied and engaged. Trying to resist this with willpower alone is like trying to stay dry in a rainstorm by deciding not to get wet. The structural forces are simply too powerful to overcome through individual determination. It helps to understand that the impulse to overconsume is not a personal moral failing. It is a predictable response to an economic system that is designed to produce exactly this result. Modern capitalism requires continuously increasing consumption to sustain growth, and the entire machinery of advertising and marketing is engineered to make you feel perpetually insufficient. When you understand this context, you can stop blaming yourself for buying things you did not need and start designing systems that protect you from the manipulation. A 2016 study from Cornell University found that people under stress showed significantly stronger tendencies toward impulse buying, overeating, and binge-watching as avoidance strategies. The connection between stress and consumption runs deep. When you feel bad, buying something triggers a temporary release of dopamine that briefly improves your mood. But the effect fades quickly, leaving you where you started or worse because now you also have the added burden of the unnecessary purchase. This cycle is driven by a well-documented neurological phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. Your brain rapidly adjusts to new stimuli, which means the pleasure you get from any new acquisition diminishes quickly, and you need something newer and more exciting to get the same hit. This is why consumption can never deliver lasting happiness. The mechanism is structurally incapable of producing sustained satisfaction. What does produce lasting satisfaction is experience and connection, but we will come back to that. The impact on sleep alone is reason enough to take this seriously. Joint research from St. Lawrence University and Princeton found that people living in cluttered environments had significantly more difficulty falling asleep and woke up more frequently during the night. The reason is straightforward. Your brain needs to feel safe before it will shift into the relaxed parasympathetic state required for deep, restorative sleep. When your visual field is full of unresolved stimuli, piles of unsorted mail, clothes draped over chairs, stacks of things you have been meaning to deal with, your brain interprets these as open tasks that still require attention. It maintains a low level of alertness that prevents full relaxation, disrupts the transition into deep sleep stages, and reduces the quality of REM sleep. The objects next to your bed are literally keeping your brain awake. Removing your phone from the bedroom, keeping work-related materials out of your sleeping space, and doing even a minimal tidying of the visible area around your bed before you turn off the lights can meaningfully improve your sleep quality. If you have been struggling with insomnia or restless sleep, before you invest in complicated sleep routines or supplements, try the simplest intervention first. Reduce the number of objects in your bedroom and see what happens. Digital spaces deserve equal attention because they impose the same cognitive burden as physical clutter, even though they are invisible. Your smartphone buzzes with dozens of notifications every day. Unread messages accumulate in multiple apps. Social media feeds scroll endlessly, each item demanding a micro-evaluation from your brain. From a neuroscience perspective, this is functionally identical to sitting in a room piled high with unresolved objects. Your brain does not distinguish between physical and digital clutter when it comes to cognitive load. Both consume the same attentional resources, both trigger the same stress responses, and both leave you feeling drained in exactly the same way. If you check your screen time statistics, you might be startled to discover how many hours you spend each day in passive, purposeless scrolling. During all of that time, your brain is processing a continuous stream of novel stimuli, burning energy, and overstimulating your dopamine pathways so that you need increasingly intense stimulation to feel engaged. Deep thinking and sustained concentration become progressively more difficult. A study found that participants who limited their social media use to 30 minutes per day experienced significant reductions in depression and loneliness after just 4 weeks. Cleaning up your digital environment is every bit as important as cleaning up your physical one. Turn off all non-essential notifications. Unfollow accounts that make you feel inadequate. Move social media apps off your home screen so that accessing them requires an extra step. Set specific times during the day when you check messages and feeds, and leave your phone in another room the rest of the time. Research has shown that even the small friction of moving an app to your second screen measurably reduces how often you use it. These are tiny changes, but they create just enough resistance to break the automatic pull of digital distraction. The same principle applies to relationships. Trying to maintain every social connection at the same level of intensity is itself a significant source of cognitive load. When your calendar is filled with obligations, meetups you attend out of guilt, and social engagements that leave you feeling drained rather than energized, you end up with no capacity left for the people who actually matter most to you. This is not about becoming antisocial or cutting people out of your life. It is about recognizing that your relational energy is finite and allocating it intentionally. The goal is not to see fewer people. The goal is to be fully present with the people you do see. 10 deeply connected relationships will give you far more satisfaction, support, and resilience than 100 superficial ones maintained out of obligation. And research consistently shows that the depth of your social connections, not the number, is what most effectively protects against loneliness. When you give yourself permission to step back from draining relationships and invest more fully in nourishing ones, the relationships that remain tend to deepen and become more rewarding for everyone involved. One of the things that surprises people most when they begin simplifying their lives is that owning less actually makes them feel more grateful, not less. When you have 100 shirts, no single one feels special. But when you have a carefully chosen handful of clothes that you genuinely love, each one becomes meaningful. The mug you drink your morning coffee from, the few books on your shelf that have actually changed the way you think, the blanket you wrap yourself in on cold evenings, these become real treasures when they are not buried in a pile of things you never use. Abundance paradoxically creates blindness. You stop seeing what you have because there is simply too much of it. Scarcity, or at least intentional curation, restores your ability to notice and appreciate. This points to the deeper transformation that minimalism makes possible. It is not ultimately about having fewer things. It is about shifting where you derive your sense of satisfaction and identity. When you stop trying to find happiness in acquisition, you become available for the kinds of experiences that actually produce lasting fulfillment. A focused conversation with someone you love, an unplanned afternoon with absolutely nothing scheduled, an hour of listening to music without any interruptions. These experiences generate a quality of satisfaction that no purchase can match because they engage you fully in the present moment rather than promising happiness in some imagined future. The satisfaction that comes from experiences and relationships is deeper and more durable than anything material consumption can provide. And this is one of the most consistently replicated findings in happiness research. This is fundamentally a shift from asking how much do I have to asking is what I have enough. When that shift happens, the compulsive comparison that social media feeds on starts to lose its grip. The hollow feeling you get from scrolling through other people's curated highlight reels begins to fade because you are no longer measuring your life against theirs. You are too engaged in actually living your own life to care. The pattern of watching other people live while neglecting your own existence starts to break apart, and in its place grows a capacity to be fully present in whatever you are doing right now. That capacity, the ability to experience this moment completely rather than always reaching for the next thing, is the deepest and most lasting gift that a simpler life can offer. When the shift from having to being takes place, life genuinely becomes lighter in a way that is difficult to describe but unmistakable once you experience it. There are certain personality types for whom this approach is especially transformative. If you are someone who thinks deeply and tires easily, if you are sensitive to comparison, if you tend to shop or stay busy when you feel anxious, if you need solitary time to recharge, then simplifying your environment is not a luxury. It is a necessity for your well-being. For people like this, minimalism is not about changing who you are. It is about arranging your world so that who you already are can function at your best. You do not need to become a different person. You need a different environment. If you are ready to begin, the most important thing to know is that starting too aggressively is the fastest path to failure. People who try to declutter their entire home in a weekend almost always burn out and give up within days. A far more effective approach is to spend 1 week simply observing and recording. Notice which objects cause you stress. Notice which decisions drain your energy. Notice which social obligations leave you depleted. Write it down. Just the act of paying attention will begin to clarify what needs to change. Once you have that clarity, work through one area at a time. This month, focus on your closet. Next month, tackle your digital environment. The month after that, look at your schedule and your social commitments. By taking it one piece at a time, you avoid overwhelm and you build momentum through small, tangible victories. Each small success generates energy and confidence for the next step. Remember that your brain is wired to resist change because unfamiliarity feels uncomfortable and potentially threatening. The initial discomfort of letting go is normal and expected. But once you experience your first small win, once you feel the difference that even a single cleared surface makes, the resistance diminishes rapidly and the process becomes self-reinforcing. There is one thing to keep firmly in mind throughout this process. There is no single correct version of minimalism. What is essential for one person may be unnecessary for another. Someone might feel perfectly content with 10 items of clothing while someone else genuinely needs 25. The point is not to reach some arbitrary number or match someone else's standard. The point is to develop your own criteria based on what actually adds value to your life. Ask yourself consistently whether each thing you own, each commitment you maintain, each digital subscription you pay for is genuinely serving you. Does this subject make my life better? Is this commitment aligned with what I actually want? Does this relationship give me energy or take it away? When you make these questions habitual, the unnecessary gradually falls away on its own, and what remains is a life composed only of things that matter to you. The empty space that appears is not a void to be feared. It is the breathing room where your most important thoughts, feelings, and desires finally have space to surface. When your life is packed to the brim with noise and stimulation, you cannot hear yourself. When the noise subsides, your own voice becomes audible again. You start to understand what you actually want, not what advertising tells you to want, not what social media suggests you should want, but what you genuinely and authentically desire for your own life. That clarity is extraordinarily valuable, and it only becomes available when you create the space for it. An empty drawer, an unscheduled weekend afternoon, 20 minutes of sitting quietly with nothing to do. These are not wasted space. They are the most fertile ground in your entire life. The discomfort you might feel when faced with emptiness, that restless urge to fill it with something, anything, is itself evidence of how thoroughly you have been conditioned to equate fullness with value. Learning to sit with that discomfort, to let the empty space simply exist, is a practice that pays extraordinary dividends over time. In that stillness, real thoughts emerge. Real emotions surface. Real priorities become clear. The signal only becomes audible when the noise stops. Just as the most powerful works of art use negative space to create meaning and invite imagination, A life with room to breathe is richer and more meaningful than one crammed with obligations and possessions. Emptiness is not deprivation. It is possibility. Nothing new can enter a life that is already completely full. You have to create space before anything truly worthwhile can arrive. Ultimately, owning less is not about living in poverty or denying yourself pleasure. It is about strategically reducing the unnecessary signals your brain has to process, lowering your daily decision fatigue, and freeing yourself from the chronic low-grade stress that cluttered, overstimulating environments create. When you own fewer things, you spend less time managing, shopping, organizing, and cleaning. That reclaimed time and energy flows naturally toward what actually matters to you. You sleep better. You focus more easily. You make choices you feel genuinely good about. You experience the present moment more fully instead of constantly planning, worrying, or regretting. Your possessions do not define you. The brand of clothes you wear or the car you drive might create a temporary impression, but who you truly are is revealed through your actions, your values, and the quality of your relationships. None of that requires a single additional purchase. You do not need a dramatic transformation. You can start by clearing one drawer, donating a few items of clothing you have not worn in a year, turning off a handful of notifications, or declining one social obligation that you have been dreading. Start small and let your brain register the difference. That tiny pocket of space you create might seem insignificant, but it sends a powerful signal to your nervous system that something has shifted. From the moment you choose to have less, your brain begins to rest a little more, and your life begins to feel a little lighter. Instead of working harder to accumulate more and stressing yourself out in the process, you are choosing to own less and experience life more deeply. That choice begins today with one empty drawer. The goal is not a perfectly minimalist existence. It is simply a life that is a little lighter and a little more intentional than it was yesterday. Those small changes accumulate, and one day you will look around and realize that your life feels fundamentally different. More focused, more peaceful, more satisfying. That is the result of choosing to own less. And that choice starts the moment you decide it does. Clear one drawer. Silence one notification. Skip one obligation that drains you. That small act is the first signal telling your brain it is okay to rest. And in that lightness, the things that truly matter will finally come into sharp, unmistakable focus. The less you carry, the freer you become, and the freer you become, the more fully you can live. Life is too short to spend on things that do not matter. Own less, experience more, love more deeply. That is what this is all about. Everything you need for a rich and meaningful life is already here. The unnecessary things are just hiding it from view. Remove them and you will see what was there all along. The quiet, steady knowledge that right now, exactly as you are enough.